You're listening to the Exhibitionist Podcast, brought to you by InspiringExhibitors.com and Pro Extra, a wholly owned division of 12 Man Solutions Limited.
Hi, and welcome to the third episode of the Exhibitionist, the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in again, and we hope you've had a fantastic couple of weeks pulling together your trade show plans, hopefully using some of the advice and inspiration you've heard in our podcasts or via the website. We've got two big features on this episode. Firstly, it's fantastic that one of our listeners, Jason, has got in touch with his trade show trouble, so we'll be going to him shortly to try and help him resolve his issue. And then we'll be following that up with our main feature, which is a conversation with Cathy Forsyth, who has worked in the health and safety and operations area of trade shows for a number of years. And it's probably the area that most of us dread the most and feel quite nervous about. But Cathy's going to help everybody understand why it's important to spend time thinking about operations and what you can do to make it easier for yourselves. The great news in between the last podcast and now is that we have signed the deal with our publisher for the Exhibitionist, the book. So that's now going into final production and will be hitting the websites and bookshops from February, March time of next year. So that's packed full with even more advice and inspiration for you guys to help make sure you get the most that you possibly can out of your trade show campaigns. But enough of us for now. We've got a packed show this episode, so I'm going to hand straight over to our conversation earlier in the week with Jason, and we'll help him solve his trade show trouble. So this week we are delighted because we have had contact from one of our listeners who wants some help with their trade show challenge. So we're excited to welcome to the show this week Jason. So hello, Jason.
Hello there.
Thank you for coming on board. So just to explain to us the challenge that you've got that you've experienced recently.
Yeah, sure. So I got in touch because we've been speaking about the sort of different types of guests that you get at shows, and in my world we're working with a lot of retailers, a lot of independent retailers who they can, their levels of engagement can vary between highly engaged, wanting to know lots of questions about the categories that you're working in. But unfortunately, the last show I was at, the retailers were more at the other end of the spectrum, where they were really just queuing up for everything they could take for free off the stand, everything they could take out of display cabinets. They were carrying multiple carrier bags full of stock and just looking to get something for nothing. And I'm really interested to sort of get some insights in terms of how we deal with those guys, because you don't want to push them away, you don't want to upset them, because they are your customers and they are buying your product. But at the same time, at the end of 3 or 4 long days at a show, it can be very difficult to not treat them with the disrespect that they're showing you. So any help and guidance is gratefully received.
It's a really interesting one, and just to clarify for anybody who's listening who's not quite sure of that scenario, so it would be food and drink environment, and potentially visitors could be looking to get free samples of things that they could then go and put on their shelves and sell as a one-off, rather than looking to stock a product long term.
Yeah, I think that's the worry. Generally at these shows, you feel like you're being treated as a cash and carry, but there's no cash involved. There's just a lot of carry.
It's a really difficult one, and when we're working with clients, when we're on our workshops, we do talk about those tire kickers who are coming along just to scoop up as many freebies as they can, and every show has their fair share of those kind of visitors, and that's really unfortunate, but I think is probably to a certain degree a reality. Maybe a couple of things to think about that we've talked with people around are having different levels of giveaway. So if you have some kind of smaller value packs maybe at the front of the stand, that people can, if they are tire kickers, if there isn't any potential for a long-term relationship, you can give them something that's kind of low value, but they at least feel like they've got something, and move them on quite quickly before some of your interested browsers or definite customers or existing customers come along, and you can actually move them towards the back of your stand, have a more engaged conversation and do some of the filtering, and then think about kind of, actually this relationship's got potential to go somewhere, and you're happier to maybe give them some packs that they might put on sale, but actually you would know that that was more of a trial for them to see if their customers were interested and giving them some feedback rather than just taking them and taking them for a freebie. But I don't know, Steve, what are your thoughts on any options?
Well, one of the options that we did talk about when this came through was brand packaging.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had availability of one of your co-packers to pack your samples for a trade show, and having the word sample or trade show stock only, then they have no option. They can't sell it, especially if it's got not for resale on. And they're going to, yes, they can take it, yes, they can use it, and maybe then they will stock it from that. But at least then you aren't going away thinking, I've just been robbed and they're just going to make money out of my show stock.
Sure.
Does that help give you any kind of advice on what you might do?
It does, yeah. I think the biggest challenge often comes. I alluded to it earlier at the end of a show when you may have other stands on the at the show that are keen to offload as much stock as they can to not get home. So you'll see the guys walking around with crates of beer, boxes of crisps, rolls of toilet roll, and it's in an environment like that, it can be difficult to sort of turn down the guy who wants to take a case of your product off the shelf. But I think they're all useful tips in helping us to say, to manage people's expectations, and particularly as well, I work in a temperature controlled environment, so I don't really want my product coming out of a chiller sitting in the back of a boot for 7 hours, sort of getting up to a nice warm ambient temperature where sort of mold and all sorts of bugs are gonna be created and then get stuck back into a chiller and sold to the general public, because often the first person, I'll be the person that gets a complaint, not the retailer. So it's just understanding all of that and managing it accordingly.
And actually, I think that's a great point that might give you a conversation to have with a visitor if they're wanting to take a lot of product away, in saying, actually, this is a temperature sensitive product, and from a health and safety perspective, so just legally, I have an obligation to make sure that it is safe for human consumption.
Yeah.
I can't control that. And therefore, I can't give it to you because I don't know that that's going to be safe if it did end up back on your shelves again. Because obviously, when you're making deliveries, you can track the progress of those orders right through the supply chain in a way that you can't if you're just giving boxes of stock to people at a show. So potentially that's the way you can
and another idea that came up this week in a conversation at a local roadshow event was actually just getting some dummy pack made up. So if someone does acquire it off your stand, or they get some polystyrene wrapped in packaging, which may be a good way of sort of keeping your brand out there in terms of presence, but not sort of costing you an arm and a leg in stock that's going to go walk about and you're going to lose control over.
Yeah.
That does bring back up something that we saw at a food show this year, where a manufacturer had their machine on running God knows how many sausages per minute using Play-Doh, and we actually watched retailers go and take dummy sausages and actually bite into them. One, it was clearly marked as Play-Doh, but if it was meat, it would have been raw meat anyway. It's just, I think sometimes at shows, the retailers just lose the plot.
It reminds me a lot, this of going back to our days where we've run trade shows in the food and drink industry and worked for exhibitors, and there was very much a culture of swaps at the end of a show, and actually some of the stand squad were some of the worst culprits for a couple of hours before the end of a show, running around all the different stands trying to swap their leftover samples. And visitors have fed back to us quite rightly that they feel that that's quite disrespectful, because you're saying to them, we can't give you any free samples of ours, but yet you've got all the stand staff running around handing out samples to get back bottles of vodka or...
Yeah, I know it's something you guys are big on in terms of those standards on the actual stand, in terms of not eating, not drinking, not reading mobile phones, doing emails. And I think the point about swaps at the end is another good one. I mean, I've kind of, having done a few of these now over the years, I've kind of like got sick and tired of getting home with a boot full of stuff that my wife just turned around and goes, well, we're never going to use any of that. I mean, what have you brought it back for? And I'm like, yeah, but it was free. I only had to exchange, this for that. But yeah, I'd like to see swaps banned completely. And because, it doesn't look great when all the staff are running around, trying to get a bottle of vodka for a packet of crisps or something. It's not a great look, and it encourages the people attending the show to do the same thing. So
yeah, it's quite interesting though. It's very much a food and drink phenomenon. It's quite the culture amongst a lot of food and drink shows. But you go to the motorhome and caravan shows we were at last week, or building shows, or and actually there's no desire to run around and do swaps at those shows. So I think it is quite exclusive to the food and drink industry. So I think one of the things as well we've just been thinking about since you got in touch, Jason, is actually sometimes there is just an implicit cost in running trade shows. And actually something that exhibitors don't necessarily think about is you are creating giveaways to give away, and that kind of hanging on to them is as much kind of as a sin as your freebie Phoebe just handing them out to everybody passing. So it's been really clear about what are you using those giveaways for? What behaviour do you want to drive? What conversation do you want to drive? What's the next things that are going to happen? And I think, all giveaways have their place in helping you get to the end point, whatever that might be. And sometimes your giveaway is actually just a way of moving somebody along. So I think sometimes there's almost just that acceptance of actually it's just a cost we've got to bear.
I think you're right. I think it's part of, if you have an overall objective for what you're trying to get out of the show, then I think your giveaways have a role to play within that. I think unfortunately it's the situation I've been experiencing has been more when you're just filling stock into a chiller or onto a shelf, and just retailers are looking to relieve you of that at the end of the day.
It's the classic line we always say, actually, though, is how would those retailers feel if you just walked into their store and said, oh, yeah, I'm just going to take these because you don't really need them, do you? And it's not a different position from that.
And also, I think a new phenomenon as well, the last 2 or 3 years, lots of shows partner up with local charities, local food banks and what have you. I found myself this year and previous times saying, I'm not giving this stock away. It's going to charity at the end of the day. And that feels like a very good way of saying no, but, taking the upper hand, as it were, and, and making sure that the stock finds a good home at the end of the show.
Yeah, great shout. Definitely all the food and drink shows tend to partner up with local food banks and charities. So it's a brilliant way of moving that conversation along. So hopefully we've given you a little bit of food for thought there and some inspiration. Oh, no pun intended there, but hopefully you have got a little bit of food for thought.
You have indeed, thank you.
And hopefully that helps. Do get back in touch. Let us know when you run your next trade show, if any of that helped, if you put any of it into practice and had some retailers who are less frustrating at the end of the day and stealing your stock. But thank you so much for getting in touch.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. So if you have a trade show trouble like Jason on any industry or any kind of challenge, please do get in touch with us via Twitter @ProExtraCo or via the website www.inspiringexhibitors.com. And we would love for you to come on the show and talk about your problem. So thanks to Jason for getting in touch with his trade show trouble. And hopefully that conversation has given him some inspiration, but also helped any other exhibitors of you who are listening in and having the same problem with some visitors who maybe want to just take a few of your freebies and not actually have a conversation to find out whether you can do business together. So on to our main feature for today. And as I mentioned, we're going to be chatting with Cathy Forsyth. It is a slightly longer episode today, and that's mainly because there's so much valuable information that we wanted to pack it all in. But we'll hand over to Cathy now and hope you enjoy the chat.
In this episode of the podcast, we're talking all things operational and the pitfalls that can mean your stand doesn't even make it onto the show floor. So I'm delighted that we're joined by hugely experienced operations manager, Cathy Forsyth. So welcome to the show, Cathy.
Hello.
Cathy, before you get into sharing your advice and experience with us, just give us a little bit of background on your career in the events industry.
Yes, certainly. I started off just doing conferences. There were sort of 1 day, 2 day ones in the tax, pensions and accountancy fields. Then I moved into medical, and that again was the conferences, but then that's when I first came into the exhibition world because they were attached to all the medical symposia. And I did that for 8.5 years. Then moved into the travel industry exhibitions for 2.5 years and went to larger venues. And then for the last 13 years, I've been in food and drink exhibitions, mainly at what was Earl's Court, then Olympia and the NEC, and then taking some British pavilions overseas to New York and Amsterdam.
You've got a really wide range of industries and countries there, and you're going to have some fantastic experiences to share with us over the next 20 minutes or so. But firstly, how can operations managers help exhibitors to have a great show?
Well, we put together the whole infrastructure for them to have both a safe and a successful show. And we get together, we build our teams of approved contractors to just make sure that everything flows as smoothly as possible.
It's really interesting you say that operations managers help keep people safe. Quite often we hear from exhibitors that operations managers are there to stop the exhibitors from doing what they want to do. To which we reply, no, they're there to keep people from harm.
That is right. We don't want them working at height. We don't want them falling to their deaths. We want them to be safe and be around for the shows.
So without naming any names, can you give us a couple of examples of disasters that you've witnessed at events over the years?
I wouldn't say that huge disasters, but there's always challenges. And however prepared you are for going on site, you never quite know what's going to happen. From like a 200 square metre stand near the front of the show, suddenly not being able to be there because they can't make it into the country or they haven't got the right stand to build. So you have to come up with ideas of how to fill that space effectively. We've got another overseas stand who turned up on site. They were supposed to be building a double-decker stand in 3 days. They got held up. They ended up with one man coming with the hugest lorry to build it in a day and a half. And when he unloaded everything, they didn't have the right parts that had already been agreed on. So then we had to get in extra staff. The structural engineer was on site. I mean, it went on and on and on. And then in the end, they did build it and it looked great, but they couldn't use the upper level because it was deemed to be unsafe for people to go up there. We've had a flood at one venue. We've had a fire at another. We've had a faulty carpet where there was pink fluff absolutely everywhere. So the cleaning staff at the venue really kicked in on that. Now we appoint official contractors, and we do that for a reason, and so that they can track everything. For example, the freight forwarders that we use at shows, they can, if you use them, then they're on site. They've got an idea of when everything's coming in, where everything is, and they're always looking out for your goods and where they are. So when an exhibitor comes in on the sort of 2 days before we open and say, oh, my product hasn't arrived yet, and we say, who have you used? And they say, another contractor. It's then, if it's the weekend, there is no way of tracing where this package is because they haven't got the right codes and the right numbers, and the office isn't manned. So sometimes, and it has happened on 2 or 3 occasions, the show has opened with an exhibitor who has no product. And then there was one exhibitor a few years ago who it eventually turned up on day 3. So they kind of stood there with a food product, sort of trying to sell a food product without it, talking about how great it is. And it wasn't until day 3 that they could actually show it to anybody. And then there's the one about sort of, I think the main word throughout our chat today is going to be communication. And at the shows we did this year, we had an exhibitor who had a product coming from the continent. They were it wasn't just a product, it was a huge piece of machinery, and it was supposed to arrive on the Friday. It didn't come on the Saturday. They're trying to find contact numbers to try and get it there. And their whole exhibition, they have a really massive stand, and this huge bit of machinery was what they were exhibiting and what it could do. And they got it to they couldn't contact anybody, nothing there. Obviously, our contractors can't help them because they don't know who they've used. It turns out on the Monday morning, at our offices in West Sussex, the lorry has been parked there for 2 days because they'd been given the wrong address. The driver doesn't speak any English, bless him, and our facilities manager had to kind of draw a map and show him where Birmingham was, because this piece of machinery was so large. He then had to drive all the way to Birmingham, and we couldn't get it in because of the size of it on the first day. It had to be specially brought in after show closed and everyone had left on that first evening. So at least they had it for 2 days. But, you know, this piece of machinery, if everything had been communicated correctly to everybody, it could have been there earlier.
There's loads of examples there, and I think people don't really necessarily think through the implications of what could go wrong when they're exhibiting. Exhibitors quite often only see themselves in their own world. They don't realise there could be 1,000 other exhibitors trying to get their kit and equipment into a venue ready for show opening. You talked there about communication being really important. Can you think of an example where that really early communication has helped save what could have been a big problem for an exhibitor, but by working together, you've come up with a great result?
Yes, we only have, where I have been working, we only had one compulsory form for all exhibitors. Obviously, if you've got a space-only stand, then exhibitors have a lot more paperwork to complete. But we only asked for one form, and it was called the Exhibitor Declaration Form. And on that, we were asking questions that could then avert a crisis. For example, we talked, because we were in the food and drink industry, it was talking to you, telling us about what they're doing on their stands with regards to food and drink sampling. And for example, some exhibitors, we asked what they were cooking and how they were cooking it. And very few, but some do come back saying, "Oh yeah, we're cooking on open cooking on charcoals." It's like, okay. What about ventilation, all that sort of thing? And the venues would not allow that, and rightfully so. Then also LPG gas, a lot of venues don't allow that in. So it's kind of preempting them already getting on site with all their kit and being ready to go, and then the health and safety officer saying you can't do that. So we've stopped them. We've prepared them so that they've got the right bits and pieces to cook on site. Also about the food hygiene. If they're saying they're doing this, then we have to send them further information about hand wash facilities, and just making sure that the environmental health officer doesn't come and go, "Oh, you can't do that," and shut them down from sampling their product, or making them. For example, one exhibitor didn't have any hand wash facilities on day one at a show, so they stopped them cooking with chicken and beef, but they let them do it with vegetables. And then the next day, they'd got some hand wash facilities on board. They'd had a sink plumbed in, so they were able to move back to chicken and beef. So helping them find different methods of cooking and helping them set up with their right hygiene facilities. Some exhibitors want to do oversized sampling. A lot of venues are very strict about the smaller size of samples, both with alcohol, non-alcoholic drinks and food. So it's kind of preempting them coming on site with too larger samples, and then the venue slapping them with an oversized sampling fee. So it's making sure that they can sample what they want within the right size and not having huge fees put on top of them. If there are large exhibits, letting us know about large exhibits so we can plan to get them into the hall early. Because there's nothing worse than everything being set up with all your space-only stands, all your shell scheme stands, everything in place, and then having to lift however many ton piece of machinery in over it. It's dangerous, and sometimes we have to say no because it is so dangerous. But it's okay if they let us know in advance. We can get it in first, we can position it, and then everything else can be built around it. Same with vehicles. Getting them in on time, letting us know you've got a vehicle, because aisles are either 2 to 3 metre wide. Most vehicles will go down that, but sometimes they're on a bend and they've got to curve round, and then there isn't enough space there. So again, getting the vehicles in early. And then letting us know about live animals.
Live animals.
We had crabs and lobsters on display, and we employed electricians overnight to check all the fridges. They would work out a list around the show, and they would work out the susceptible stands. For example, ice cream stands and pâtés and anything with a live animal in. For example, these live crabs and lobsters, you had to keep their system on, otherwise they would die. And then we had to keep that on for half an hour after the show. Sorry, electricity is normally kept on half an hour after a show. We had to keep it on a little longer so they could then get the containers in, their transport containers, move the lobsters and crabs into these containers and then get them out. We didn't want to turn it off and let them die in that intervening time.
And it's those sorts of things that exhibitors never really think about and never genuinely believe that a health and safety officer will say to them, "We're not allowing this, you can't build your stand."
Yep, and they will.
Cathy, it's so good to hear you say that. We often talk to clients about this and they just don't believe that it ever happens. So although it's pretty rare, sometimes it does happen.
And I've seen, not at one of the shows I've done, but I have seen a stand at an exhibition that has been completely taped off and nobody has been allowed on it. Obviously, it had got to a point where they'd built it to so far, they'd run out of time, and it was deemed unsafe. Not unsafe to fall down in an aisle, but if you were on it. So it had been taped up. That does happen.
And that's never going to reflect well on your brand or your budget when you've spent so much getting to this point, but you never actually deliver a fully built stand.
So talking about challenges, what is the most exciting or challenging show you've ever worked on, and what did you learn from it?
I think I'm going to do that in two parts. One is launching a new show and seeing that grow. And when you're dealing with a new set of exhibitors who need training right from the start, who might not have had a show in their area before, and then talking them through it, sometimes it can be quite challenging because they've got lots and lots of questions. But then getting them there, seeing the show open, and the whole buzz created, and then when the visitors meet the exhibitors and just seeing it grow year on year, that is exciting. And then having on the other scale, having an established show where you've got, we did a large food machinery show, which was always challenging with the size of the stands, the size of the machinery and everything that had to be brought in, building up your working relationship with all your contractors so that when things are lifted in, sometimes they come in the wrong size and you might have built all your shell scheme. So some of the shell might have to come down, and just trying to work out the best way, planning it from the start, but then other people are always going to kind of throw a spanner in the works. So then it's being able to rely on your contractors and get the job done. Like the little shell might have to come down, the lifting might have to go in a different way. So it's all working together to do that. And then with that show, there are so many, because the stands are so big, we have walling regulations so that you're not blocking off other stands. It's and compromise to see how it can work with, you can put perspex in walls and just see that it's an open show so that no one feels completely blocked off. And then with that comes the banners and lighting rigs, and that brings its own set of rules and regulations, and making sure they're all at the correct height so that everyone's happy and somebody's banner isn't above anybody else's, that they feel they're getting more prominent. So it's a fine balance, that one.
Keeping everybody happy.
That's right.
The Exhibitor Manual is usually the place where exhibitors can go to find every single answer to every single question that they might have. But it's probably the document that exhibitors spend the least amount of time with. So how do you think exhibitors can benefit from spending a little bit more time early on in the process, digesting what's in their manual?
They could learn so much. When we send out the manuals, we have a back office and we can see how many people have logged on. After, say, 2 weeks, we can see the percentage, which is never very high. We then email them again to say if they've just to remind them to log on. Sorry, we email the ones who haven't logged on to remind them. Then there's a little upsurge on that, and you're still left with probably about 40 to 50% who haven't logged on within the first month. We then ring them all just to check that we're sending the emails and the links to the right place, because again, the word communication, the relevant contact that we've got at the company might have left. They've passed it on to someone else, and they don't realise what's happening, or they haven't passed it on to someone else and no one at the firm knows they're exhibiting. So we have quite a few conversations with going, oh, I didn't know we were exhibiting at that show. When is it? What's it about? What have we got? And so that goes on. So it's everything is there on the Exhibitor Manual. We spend a huge amount of time setting it all up. And it's got everything, whether you're a shell scheme or a space only. They've come on so much in recent years. Ours, you could do like a keyword if you were looking for something about, say, costumed characters. You'd type that in and it would tell you what you needed. And for example, for the shell scheme stands, you've got what the difference is between a shell and space, and what's included in a shell, and the size of the panels, and how to affix signage to walls. And then for space only, you've got what documentation is required, all the deadlines, instructions for hanging bands. Everything is there. And if every exhibitor just logs on once and then just sees it all, they can upload their details and their logos onto the website, and they know. Then when potential visitors are looking, then they've got something there rather than just a name, and they're missing out on a lot of traffic going through the website if it's not there.
That's such a big number. Of almost half of all exhibitors don't log on or access the Exhibitor Manual website in the early days of their planning.
They do eventually log on, but we're ringing and we're nagging basically. It comes to the point where we need that compulsory exhibitor declaration form back, and they need to go on to do that. But within the first month, yes, you're looking at very high percentages not logging on.
So digesting the Exhibitor Manual is one of the biggest pitfalls that exhibitors can fall into. But what are the other common operational mistakes that you've seen exhibitors make?
Yes, communication, not keeping a record of things. Now I don't want to advocate killing lots of trees, but just keeping, we don't send out a lot of correspondence. We will send out a welcome letter, a copy of the floor plan, a copy of the contract, and a copy of our terms and conditions. But it's either saving them somewhere, scanning and saving them on a file that's easy for everyone to access within the company who'd need it, or having a hard copy manual, a hard copy file where they file it. Because as I said earlier, if they leave the company and no one's got any record of it, then that doesn't help anyone. And they've booked. They know if it's a shell or a space stand. We also have started sending, in my last year, we'd also started sending out a little sheet with the welcome pack saying, this is a shell scheme stand, you have booked this is what it entails. This is a shell scheme stand, this is what it entails, just in case they booked the wrong thing. Yeah. Now, I know that if you're booking for a show a year out or 2 years out, there might be a big change in your budgets. You might think, oh, we've got the money to build an all singing, all dancing, space only stand now. Let's change, and vice versa. So it does happen, but there is also an element of the person who booked the stand not knowing exactly what they're booking, not logging onto the manual early enough and getting their information up and logo up. I feel that's a lost opportunity. Also linking on to that, if they haven't logged on, they haven't ordered their services, sometimes perhaps the early bird deadlines, so then that's costing them money. Yeah. Going online and ordering their visitor invitations and links, and not taking advantage of the opportunity to target their own database. I mean, those are their key people, and to get that date in their diaries early is key. Also, not reading the build-up and breakdown dates carefully, and turning up too late or too early.
We've seen that happen a few times.
Yep. Those are the kind of things.
I think that communication and engagement from internal teams is really important, knowing how things are tracking and where you are with things. So we do have operational trackers we can make available to listeners. So if anyone out there is interested in the ops trackers that we use with clients, do get in touch and we can talk about how we share those with you. But getting back to you, Cathy, we've talked about live animals, which is a fairly unusual request. But what is the most unusual request that you've ever had from an exhibitor?
Well, on my live animals, as well as the crabs and lobsters, I've also got eagles and mice.
Wow. Were the mice for dinner for the eagles, or?
No, they weren't, but it was the same kind of pest control kind of companies. Delivering equipment a week early and wanting to leave it behind for later than advertised. I think the perception is that the venue's there, but unfortunately there are other shows. We get that quite a lot. Acrobats performing directly above the stand during a show open period, not in a designated area, but directly above the stand. Running an operational car wash on a stand.
Wow. Free showers for exhibitors and visitors in that case then, I think.
Naked chef doing demos.
That sounds like my kind of show.
Yep, that was a good one, but he wasn't completely, so that's okay. My absolute all-time favourite is an exhibitor who my colleague was trying to talk around because he wanted to be enclosed on all four sides of his stand.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he couldn't quite grasp the concept that he needed to be seen. So that was an entertaining one. The most common, unusual, it's not that unusual, but it is a request that a lot of exhibitors ask us. They've opted for shell scheme, and then they ring up or email and say, yes, we want the shell scheme, but we don't want any fascias and we don't want any ceiling grid. So the question has to be asked, how do the walls stand up?
Yeah.
And then they get some are fine about what we suggest is that we have to have a return wall and some bracing in the corners, and maybe in the centre, because these walls do have to be structurally safe.
Yeah.
So that is the unusual. It's not unusual in the occurrence of it, but it is an unusual request.
Interesting. One of the things that we've learned on the workshops recently has been people's lack of understanding between the word shell and space, and not really thinking about what they've booked in the context of everyone else around them and who's going to be exhibiting. Exhibitors just tend to think about that 9-metre space that they've got and what they're going to do in that, and that nothing else around them really matters. So we've talked a lot today about how the ops teams can help exhibitors have a more successful show. We've heard a lot about reading the Exhibitor Manual, communicating with the operations team, making sure that you as an exhibitor understand the rules and that you've built your stand accordingly. But from an operations manager's perspective, what's the one piece of advice you would give to an exhibitor who was planning to exhibit at a show?
Again, the word communication, and it comes on so many different levels. The exhibitors are investing a lot of money in their stand, the stand build, the staff, the hotels and subsistence, marketing, refreshments. The list does go on and on. And what I mentioned before about keeping a copy of your correspondence about the show, so you can build up a history. And it's not just for this show, that person might have left in the year, 2 years between the next show. Someone has got a copy of something that they did to be passed on to them, so they've got a starting point to base their show for the next time, whether it is digital on a central file or a hard copy. But we get a lot of people saying, oh, what did we do last year? What did our stand look like?
Yeah.
And it sometimes we can assist, because we do keep space only stand plans for the last show on file, but surely that should be within their company, and just they can then grow from that stand, and they can move on from it, and it can evolve rather than starting from scratch again. We don't send out a lot of paperwork. Most of it is done by email now, because we are environmentally friendly. We strive to it, but we do send out key things at key times that they should have, and then we do send things out digitally as well. So it's keeping that all safe, and so that they know what's going on. Also, the person who organises the stand might not, in some cases, be the person who attends on site. So it's letting the staff who are on site know what's going to happen, where the equipment's coming from, courier names and numbers, the timings of things. When we have build-up and breakdown, but build-up mainly, on that, it is a building site, and some people do turn up in flip-flops or stuffy sandals, or on some occasions in bare feet. And there is so many dangers out on that floor at that time on what they could do. And the medical centres are there, but we don't want them overrun with preventable accidents. So it's passing that information on as well, because really, really high heels on that build-up day, not a good idea. And also letting the staff know what's expected of them. If they're sitting and standing around looking bored on their stand, or playing on their phones or texting their friends, they are wasting the exhibitor's money and all the time and effort it took to get the stand to that state. After one show we had recently, one exhibitor told our sales team that they wouldn't be rebooking because they didn't get any good leads, and they were in a very quiet part of the hall and they didn't get much passing trade. But all the other stands around them did rebook and they had a good show. And the member of the sales team remembered who was on that stand and said, well, it's no wonder they didn't have a good show because they were on their phone permanently. So you've got to communicate with your on-site staff to engage with the visitors, because you've put a lot of time and effort in to get to that point.
You're right, there is nothing more frustrating than walking around a show that you're really interested in, you're there to buy, you want to have really good conversations with people who can solve your problems, and the exhibitors just don't seem that bothered about engaging with you. It's really disheartening as a visitor.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I really like the one word that you've used there, which was preventable. And I think most of this conversation has been about the fact that everything is pretty much preventable if you just communicate the right information to the right people. Let them know what's expected of them, let them know where they need to be, what they need to be doing there, and have really clear briefs. So many of the disasters that could happen at shows can be averted if you just communicate to the right people at the right time with the right information.
Absolutely.
Thanks ever so much for joining us today, Cathy. It's really interesting to talk to someone who's working at the coalface and reinforcing some of the comments and the views that we share with clients and delegates on the workshops. We can often give some advice and talk about how you can use the operations manual and the operations team to help you, but it's great to hear from somebody actually working at the front line of that. So who else in the industry do you think it'd be interesting for us to speak to about exhibitions?
I've made a list of 4 people, and I'll send you their email addresses. But Leanne Newton from ESS, she runs her own business, and they approve all our space-only stand plans. So she deals with lots of exhibitors and their ideas and what their preconceptions are and what they think they can and can't do. Then I've put Andrew Abbo. You met him?
Oh, we know Abbo, yeah.
You know Abbo, because I think he has a great understanding of what happens on site, and he can talk about what exhibitors try and get up to.
It's funny, in the training courses that we run, we do tell delegates to go and find out who is the head of health and safety and security on site on the first day. Go and make friends with them, buy them a coffee, and you will get the payback from that in buckets over the next few days when things maybe aren't quite going according to plan and you need a little bit of help at the venue.
Absolutely. Then Jenny Green from Showlight.
Okay.
And then a lady that I'm hopefully going to be doing some work for from Event Shaper, Louise Kiwanaku.
Right.
So she runs an operational business, exhibition operations, and she does a variety of shows up and down the country.
So Cathy, it's been great speaking to you today. You've given us some great insight into the life of an operations manager and how exhibitors can work with you to have a more successful show. So you're now working as a freelance operations manager, and I know you've got lots of exciting projects coming up, but if any of our listeners are interested in working with you and want to get in touch, where can they find you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn at the moment, and I have an email address, which is orchardcathy, Cathy with a C, @gmail.com.
And in case you didn't catch that, then please get in touch with us at Inspiring Exhibitors, and we can pass on Cathy's details for you. So thanks very much. Good luck with your upcoming projects and enjoy the rest of the summer.
Absolutely.
So a really packed conversation there with Cathy, and hopefully what you got from that is that health and safety in operations isn't about stopping you doing the things that you want to do at your exhibition. It's entirely about helping you do them safely. So hopefully you've got some advice and some inspiration, but any of the questions resulting from that conversation, of course, get in touch with us as always. Coming up in a couple of weeks on the next episode, we were really excited to speak to Richard Fox. Now, Richard is a well-known chef. He's appeared on a number of TV programmes. He's also a love, food, hate, waste warrior ambassador, and he works with a lot of organisations up and down the country in promoting great food, great cooking, and abolishing as much waste as we can from our food chain. Now, you might wonder what that has to do with exhibitions, and we've worked with Richard on a number of exhibitions where he's been the compere at the live features area. So he's introducing speakers, recruiting speakers, developing content for visitors. And it's great to get his thoughts on what makes a really good session, what makes it interesting and relevant for those visitors. And that's what he's going to be sharing with you in case you ever want to get on a speaker platform at one of your shows. So that's it for now for us from this week. As always, you can contact us via the website at www.inspiringexhibitors.com. You can follow us on Twitter at ProExtraCo, or you can give us a call. The numbers again are on the website. Have a great couple of weeks planning your exhibitions. There'll be new blog content on the website next week, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
If you'd like more information about our book, The Exhibitionist, future podcasts and newsletters, please remember to pop over to inspiringexhibitors.com, where you'll be able to find all the relevant information. Once again, thank you for listening.